this meeting is being live streamed for the public to be aware. Item 1 on the agenda. Be quiet there. Item 1 on the agenda is the election of the chairman for the committee. I would like to move Councillor Guglielmi as the chairman for the committee. And I will propose that. I have a seconder.
Yes, I'd like to second that.
Well, welcome, Carlo. We value your experience and knowledge to this committee, particularly because obviously we were reviewing the local plan, and obviously the Tendring Garden Board is a valued member of the knowledge and experience he brings to these committees. Thank you.
Chairman, sorry to interject. I think you need to ask if there are any other nominations and then actually put it to a vote.
Sorry, I got carried away. Yeah, is there any other nominations? No. Apologies.
So I assume everybody's in favour of that? Yeah, no, nobody seemed, no, looks like it was unanimous. Thank you.
Can I place my thanks, Councillor Bush, for your kind words, and members of the committee for your faith that you placed in me. This is déjà vu. Back in 2014, we set up the local plan, and there were very embryonic stage where we used to hold it in the Princess Theatre, where we used to get up to about 400 people attending in those days. And it's lovely to be back on the Elm. Very exciting time for this. The review is coming up, as you said. Tendring Colchester border is progressing extremely well, and we've got the agenda this evening, something I've been working for a long time, and it's lovely to see it come to fruition. And so it's a very exciting time to take on this job, and I'm very pleased and very grateful to you all for trusting me. Thank you very much indeed. Okay, so we go to agenda item 2 for apologies for absence. Ian?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I can offer apologies for absence this evening from Councillor Scott, and he's been substituted tonight by Councillor Wiggins. I can also offer apologies on behalf of Councillor Baker, the Housing and Planning Portfolio holder, who, as you know, has a standing invitation to attend these meetings. Unfortunately, he's come down with an illness, so he's had to give his apologies for this evening's meeting. And also just to inform members that the chairman of the planning committee, Councillor Fowler, who also has a standing invitation to attend these meetings, she's attending this meeting online.
Sorry, thanks so much indeed, and nice to see you, Maria. Can you hear us?
Chairman, good evening.
Lovely, thank you. Nice to see you. Good to see you. Okay, so we've not heard from Councillor Leonard. Okay. Minutes of the last meeting, they're on page 1 to 12. Obviously, I wasn't here. Would anybody like to? True record. All in favour? Yeah. Thank you very much. They carried. If I let Councillor Bush sign them, because obviously you were here, and pass them on. Whilst you do that, are there any declaration of interest that anyone wish to record? No. Okay. Agenda item 5, question or notice pursuant to Council Procedure Rule 38. Are there any?
None received, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much indeed. Item 6 is public speaking. The scheme is published on page 13 and 16. Do we have any people interested to speak?
Not on this occasion, Chairman.
Thank you very much. That's lovely. And we go.
Chairman, if I may, do you mind if we just shut that door? That's lovely.
Superb. Thank you very much, sir. Thank you. Agenda item 7. It's a draft Jaywick Sands Place Plan in the hand of Hannah and Gary. Welcome. Nice to see you. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Chairman. And firstly, congratulations on your appointment to this position. I look forward to as we go forward. So before you tonight, you have the report containing the draft Jaywick Sands Place Plan. Very delighted to have next to me Hannah Loftus of HAT Projects, principal author of the work with her consultancy firm, who've been working with the council for a number of years actually now on various projects related to Jaywick, including, you will recall from earlier in the year, the council adopted a new Jaywick Sands design guide, which is to provide essentially a design code for development that can be achieved in the Jaywick Sands area, having regard to its very specific challenges around flood risk and needing new development to be flood resilient as we go forward. And that was informed by public consultation, as has this piece of work before you now, which is an overarching strategy, a place plan, which contains a number of what we would consider to be tangible interventions that together provide a strategy for the long-term regeneration of the Jaywick Sands area, given its very specific challenges around flood risk, deprivation, and the quality of life for residents in that area. One of the key things to point out before I hand over to Hannah is that the intention of this work was very much to develop a strategy that we could work with the community to deliver, rather than a strategy that is imposed upon a community that doesn't want to support it. And key to the success of this will be ongoing engagement and the ongoing support of the residents of the Jaywick Sands area. And my belief from the work that Hannah and her team have produced here is that we have a strategy that genuinely takes on board the hopes and fears of residents in Jaywick Sands. And in delivering these, we would look for support all the way through. For many, many years, we've had ministers and senior officials from government visit Jaywick Sands because of its sort of statistical relevance around deprivation. There is a genuine acknowledgement of the challenges that the area has placed, but really until now, what we've never had is a broadly costed scheme of tangible interventions that we can have serious conversations with government and other potential funders with. And the intention with the committee's blessing is to ask Cabinet's permission to go out for further consultation. What I'll do now is I'm going to attempt to make the technology work. I'm going to invite Hannah Loftus to give a presentation on the key elements of this place plan. But bear with me while I try and make this happen.
Hey, thank you very much for the presentation. Whilst you set it up, it's also worth mentioning that we've had 8, possibly 9 housing ministers down to see in various different stages, and I believe we've also had 3 prime ministers come down as far back as Mr. David Cameron. So it's really gratifying to see that we've gone in the right direction. But the technology also is almost there.
It's sort of the main screen is a bit behind mine. Bear with me. Lost all the flow now. That's a shame, isn't it? Let's try that one. Splendid. There we go.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you very much to the committee. So the place plan derives from the objectives set out in the tendering local plan for Jaywick Sands, which are set out on this slide. So that the objectives that the tendering local plan sets out for Jaywick are 5. Transform housing quality in the built environment, ensure long-term flood resilience, create greater connectivity to neighbouring areas, attract commerce and new economic opportunities, and improve people's life chances, access to public services, and health and well-being. So the whole of the place plan has been developed to try and address those 5 objectives. Clearly, there are a lot of overlaps between those objectives. Meeting housing quality will obviously improve people's life chances. Ensuring long-term flood resilience is key to attracting commerce and economic opportunities, because no one is going to be that keen on investing in somewhere where they're not sure about its long-term future. But I think, as Gary mentioned, all of these really are aiming to really raise that standard of living in Jaywick Sands for the community of Jaywick Sands, which for a long time has had many challenges. And it's worth saying that this is obviously part of much wider partnership working, which we know that the council is engaged with many other agencies, with the county council, with the Environment Agency, and many others. So this is a part of the puzzle, but we hope it provides that sustainable, deliverable development framework going forward. So why do this? Well, Gary sort of set this out, so I won't read out everything here, but I think it's really important, and we find this across the country with our work, that you have a coordinated strategy so that projects that come forward are all pulling in the same direction. You're not just attacking things piecemeal, but you're actually looking at the bigger picture and making sure that all of those initiatives and projects that come forward, whether it's led by the council or by others, they pull in the same direction and they add up to a meaningful difference. I think it's worth restating that the flood risk in Jaywick Sands is real and is increasing all the time due to sea level rise caused by climate change. So this isn't a sort of theoretical problem, but the data is really clear, and the risk that poses is made worse by the fact that the housing is not all of very good quality. So having an area of flood risk with very resilient housing allows people to perhaps live through those sorts of events without too much harm coming to them. But in an area like Jaywick Sands, where some of the homes really are in a very poor quality, that really does pose a significant risk. I think it's also really worth stating that throughout this process, relocation of a community and a comprehensive, if you like, demolition and rebuild option has not been considered, because we know how that is not welcomed by the local community, and that's been discussed in depth through the process. We know that that's not what the community wants to see, so that is not an option that's taken forward in the draft place plan. And I think it's really important that everybody does understand that, because we know there have been fears around that in the past. There have been obviously other ideas put forward many years ago, but at this point in time, this is absolutely not the position the council is taking. Next. So just the work done today, it has been a lengthy period, starting in 2018, paused during COVID, late 2021 we started back up again. Consultation last year with the community, we had a really good response from the community. We met lots and lots of people in person and heard a lot of really useful insights. Alongside that, we've also now had, which we didn't have for the consultation in 2022, the study that the Environment Agency has done into their coastal defences. And that's a really big part of the picture. So a large part of the work since that consultation has been absorbing that Environment Agency study, working with the Environment Agency on what the feasible proposals are that come out of that, and working that into the place plan that's here. And as Gary mentioned, we hope to go to consultation. That further feedback will inform a final version of the place plan, which then, all things going well, will come, of course, back to this committee and back through the process before it is adopted. Next. So the place plan is a long-term framework for generation. We know that change is not going to happen overnight. But alongside that, it has got, as Gary mentioned, tangible actions and initiatives. So it's not just setting out a vision which is vague, but it's actually saying here are the steps that will get you there. Funding is clearly going to be a major challenge, because none of these things are necessarily cheap. But it's important that you do have, if you like, that shopping list, and that you can then go out And when funding opportunities arise, whether it's nationally or regionally, you're in a good place to be able to say, well, actually, this is what we want to spend the money on. We know that that's going to make a difference, and we have a reasonably robust budget to start putting those funding bids together. So the place plan vision is set out here. The vision for Jaywick Sands is to be a thriving community that makes the most of its coastal location and its unique character, while being resilient to the risks posed by sea level rise. And I think just to pick out two things from that vision, the coastal location of Jaywick Sands is its biggest asset as well as its biggest challenge. The beach there is amazing. I spent most of today actually in Jaywick, and that could be a real driver for the economy of Jaywick Sands, but only if it's resilient to that flood risk as well. So the components of the vision really include improved flood defences, which do maintain that protection, but also create an attractive, accessible seafront for residents and visitors, which will increase tourism and the jobs that can support in the local community. Residential streets should see vacant and derelict plots brought back into use, and new homes that are distinctive and beautifully designed, as well as being flood safe and on well-designed plots that provide good amenity for their residents. Property owners should be improving their existing homes and rental properties and supported to do that in a variety of ways. Streets and spaces will be green, attractive and well used, helping residents lead active lives and making it easier to get around the community. And the community should have the shops and services it needs within a short walk of every home. We know at the minute there is a deficit in local services for many day-to-day needs in the community. So this place plan is therefore, as you can see, meeting these 5 objectives which are listed down the side of the slide here. So they do overlap. The flood defence design framework that integrates wider improvements of the seafront public realm, accessibility to the beach, but minimises impact on properties. This includes converting Brooklands to a one-way street with footways and cycle space. A design and delivery framework for improving the residential areas, replacing over time poor quality homes that are unsafe and lack flood resilience with better quality homes. A land use plan which identifies areas where commercial and community uses should be safeguarded and additional space developed to ensure those day-to-day needs are met. It includes improvements to green spaces to support active lifestyles, well-being and community activity, and improvements to walking and wheeling routes, including a new north-south route which will improve emergency access in the event, which we all hope would not happen, but may well happen, of a flood event. And finally, there are some recommendations for infrastructure improvements, particularly to drainage, which we know is a real issue in the community. I'll go through each of those now in a little bit more detail, but firstly, just to sort of put this on the map, as it were, and show you what that really means. And I know this is a bit difficult to see on screen, but it is, of course, in the report as well. I could probably give you a page reference if I was being really smart. I think it's around page, someone's got there before me. I can hear. Yes, page 37 of your reports pack, which is page 7 of the report itself. So this shows the various zones, if you like. So the zone for the flood defences and the improved public realm that goes along with that. The existing residential areas where the new design and delivery approach applies, areas for safeguarding existing commercial and community uses, and sites which are the TDC owned sites where new business, retail and community facilities would be appropriate. The green spaces that we're looking at for improvement, that new walking and wheeling route, which is sort of in orange on the screen as a line across Tudor Fields, and the various other active travel and movement improvements as well. So to take each of those one by one, and I'll probably spend more time on the flood defences and the housing because those are the main challenges. The others are more straightforward. So this is taken from the Environment Agency's reports. The defences are providing a lower standard of protection every year due to sea level rise. And the residual, what's known as the residual life, and I apologise in advance for some jargon, is also decreasing. So that is the time until the year where they're predicted to be at risk of a breach or structural failure. So that would obviously be quite a serious problem. The target, if you like, is what's known as a 0.5 AEP standard of protection. So that means that in any given year, there's a 0.5% chance of those defences being overtopped. So that's the nationally accepted standard for tidal flood defences. And that's really where we're aiming to get to in terms of the long-term flood resilience of the community. And we're looking at that in line with climate change. So we're essentially looking at 100 years here to say, well, what would make this 100 years into the future still a safe place? Because that's about providing that certainty to people that the investments that they make and the lives that they might live are going to be safe. The table here shows you the different years that the Environment Agency have assessed against. So that sort of does show you a little bit of how that standard of protection goes down as you go further into the future. So for instance, DU2, which is Defence Unit 2 in front of Brooklands, currently it has a 0.5% standard of protection, but in 50 years, that's got worse by a factor of 4. So instead of a 0.5% chance, you've actually got a 2% chance of those defences being overtopped. That's actually the best of all of the units. DU3, DU4 and DU5 already have lower standards of defences. We're mainly concerned here with DU2 and DU3 because they're the ones that affect JWIC. DU1 is Cockett-Wick, whereas you probably are aware there are already works ongoing right now to improve that. So that's why that's not on this table. Then you can see this residual life business. So as you can see, again, DU2 has only a 16-year residual life. So its predicted moment where it may be at risk of breach or structural failure is only 2038. And we know that when we're talking about infrastructure improvement, 16 years can pass remarkably fast, can't it? So that's not very far into the future. So the Environment Agency has looked at the options for improving those defences because that time period is coming up in the next 15, 16 years. Now, the next slide illustrates what the Environment Agency's report calls their nationally preferred option. And again, I do apologise that this is quite technical, but it is quite important stuff, so I'll try and explain it as simply as I possibly can. They assess according to DEFRA and Treasury guidance. So they have a set of rules that they have to go through to say what is a preferred option in these circumstances, and that applies across the whole country. It's not specific to JWIC Sands. They are engineering options only. They do not assess wider impacts in terms of the visual quality of those defences or in terms of the impacts on the community. They just purely look at it from an engineering perspective. They do look at cost benefit as well along those options, but that cost benefit, they have some very, very strict rules about how they calculate that. The nationally preferred option that they identify according to those rules is incremental wall raising on the line of the existing sea wall. And that would happen in 2 stages. The first would start in 2033 and the second would start in 2058. So it would basically go up half and then another half after that. And then that would get you to a point where that would then provide protection for approximately another 70 years after that before any more work would need to be done. You can see that that would be quite a lengthy process for the community to go through. And these visualizations, which are just sketches, but they are measured and they are to scale, show the full wall raising at the end of that 2058 phase. So that's the total that they would be proposing after that. Now, there are a number of challenges that come with that. Firstly, the impact on those existing homes and properties, because that is ending up to be quite a high wall in front of people's homes. And secondly, what does that mean for the accessibility for the beach and all of those economic benefits that flow from actually having an amazing beach there, which suddenly is cut off from the community by a very functional set of flood defences, but not one that necessarily offers much tourism benefit. And the third challenge, I think it's worth stating, is that there is no certainty at this point in time that the system for funding these sorts of flood defence improvements is going to stay the same between now and 2058. So there is a risk that one could get a way down this process. Circumstances do change, we see this just yesterday, don't we, with all of the announcements from government. We don't have certainty, and we could not guarantee to you, and neither could the Environment Agency, that come 2058 or 2040 or whenever, or even 2033 for that matter, that funding would actually be on the table to be able to be used. So there's a number of risks that accrue with their approach, which they fully acknowledge, but they are working within the rules that they have been set. We've looked at how we could adapt.
Sorry, Hannah. I just want to alert the committee. Page 113 of your printed agenda, you can actually see there the photographs of the area in its current state, juxtaposed with the graphic representation of what the heightened wall would look like in comparison. So just so you've got a comparator.
Thanks, Gary. So we've looked at adapting their approach to something that could provide wider community benefit and be a more attractive and sustainable option for Jaywick Sands going forward. So clearly the overall height of the defences is a set. We can't make them lower just because we feel like it. They do need to reach a height which provides safety to the community. But the option that we're taking forward as a preferred option is essentially to build a new seawall, that new higher seawall in front of the existing wall, following which the existing seawall can be taken down, and you can actually use that space to create a landscape public realm approach, which allows both better amenity for the existing seafront residents, but also better accessibility to the beach. And that's shown on this page here. So the idea here is to improve access to the beach and use of the beach, including for wheelchair users, people with buggies, all sorts of different kinds of people with different needs, and also allow that seafront as a whole to be re-landscaped so it's much more attractive. We obviously have some wonderfully attractive seafronts along the Tendring coastline and other parts of the district, and really the aim is to say, well, actually Jaywick Sands should have a seafront that's as attractive as a place to come and visit as Frinton or Clapton or the other parts of the district that are so well used. So this shows what that could look like in Brookland, and the next one shows what that could look like in the village, a similar approach. But of course, in the village area of Jaywick Sands, you don't have a vehicle road along the front, you have a walking and cycling route, as you know. So that would allow that to become a really good cycling and walking route, with then the raised promenade at the higher level and access down to the beach on the other side. Now for the tough bits around funding. And again, so having had some pretty pictures, I have to go back to some more technical words here. So current rules say that you can get flood defence grant in aid, but you can't get that until 2033 because of the way that the rules are set up. So they won't give you that flood defence grant in aid until your defences are at a point where they're deemed to be at imminent risk of failure. So they won't give it you now because they're going to fail in 15 years. They'll give it to you in 10 years' time to give you time to build those defences before the moment of failure. And the way that the DEFRA guidance works, they would give you some of it in 2033 and then some of it again in 2058, though it has to be said the majority would come in 2033. The preferred place plan option is actually to deliver it all at once. So rather than subject the community to a major infrastructure project in 2033 and then 20 years later another one, to actually do it all at once, provide a really good comprehensive solution that provides that confidence and support for further regeneration and investment. So once that's done, the ability to attract further investment into the area is much, much easier. The flood defence grant in aid that the government, central government under current rules would provide as a matter of sort of default, if you like, is not sufficient to cover either the Environment Agency's nationally preferred option or the place plan's preferred option. So even the sort of baseline option, if you like, which is just a simple wall raising, is more expensive than the grant in aid available. And the Environment Agency would therefore require you, as the local authority, to find partnership funding, what they call partnership funding for that. For their nationally preferred, if you like, baseline option, that partnership funding would be in the region of £20 million, and that's at today's values. With inflation to 2033 and 2058, it obviously goes up. But if you're talking about, well, if you were going to put that money in a bank account now and save it for 2033, you'd need to put £20 million in the bank today and keep that till 2033 and 2058 and spend it according to those plans. The place plan preferred approach requires substantially more partnership funding in the region of 84 million at today's values. But that would be for a single stage approach delivered from 2033. So you'd take the flood grant and aid that you could get at 2033, you'd add your 84 million to it, and then that would provide that entire seafront scheme all the way along Brooklands and the village seafront. And that's been costed out with a pretty healthy contingency optimism bias as well. So we're fairly confident in those costs. Clearly, if you didn't want to wait till 2033, you couldn't even get that bit of grant and aid funding that would be available at that point, and you'd have to pay for the entire lot, which would be 108 million. Now, these are really big numbers, and we're very well aware of the implications of that. However, obviously, we have discussed with officers in the development of this what the preferred option should really be. Should we be looking at a preferred option that's along the lines of the nationally preferred option, or should we be looking at a more ambitious option that secures greater benefit? And the view of officers who've been guiding us with this process is that we should be aiming for a more ambitious option, because ultimately, if Jaywick Sands is going to be a sustainable and vibrant community, it needs to have a seafront that is going to sustain that economy and is going to provide that quality of life for residents as well. And it sets the bar high in saying to government, well, actually, if you're serious about regenerating places like Jaywick Sands, you can't just go for, if you like, a kind of cut price option that is going to maybe keep people safe, but ultimately is never going to bring any wider economic benefits. Or you could look at a more ambitious option with a wider cost benefit analysis that says, well, actually, what is the investment that can be attracted into the area as a result of that? And unfortunately, that sort of cost benefit analysis does not factor into the Environment Agency's Treasury guidance for flood defences. Is simply not a factor. They do not take into account wider economic benefits and regeneration benefits in their cost benefit analysis. They purely only look at essentially the homes that are protected and the value of those homes in the present day. So with apologies for a very long explanation, but I hope that is somewhat helpful in unpacking that thorny subject. On to the residential areas. So we know that the residential neighbourhoods have some really lovely homes, which people absolutely look after and take care of very, very well. But equally, there is a level of dereliction in some parts and on some plots. And some of those homes that are really lovely are beautiful and well cared for, but also still not flood resilient. And it's no criticism on those homeowners. Those are the homes that they have. But the reality is they aren't necessarily going to be very safe in a flood event. The preferred strategy, we've gone around a lot of different strategies on the improvement of residential areas, but I think it's accepted with the number of homes in Jaywick Sands. It's really important that it is not just about public sector intervention trying to redevelop every single home there to a new standard. It is about working with property owners as well as with the land holdings that Tendring already has to develop, to gradually and incrementally improve properties. There are over 800 homes in Brooklands alone. There's another 1,200 in the village. Taking on a comprehensive redevelopment, even if you could manage it with the consent of the community, would be a huge and very expensive undertaking. The strategy is, the preferred strategy is to use the plots that Tendring Council already own, along with purchasing additional vacant and derelict plots. So this is not purchasing homes that are lived in by people. This is purchasing the approximately, I think it's around 60 plots that are actually vacant or derelict, and using those plots to improve the quality of the built environment and create better quality homes. So there's a strategy that we've worked out quite carefully in terms of the viability and the financial implications of this. But fundamentally, this would be developing double and triple plots. So that's where you've got 2 plots adjacent to each other or 3 plots adjacent for new flood resilient and high quality council homes, and using some other blocks of plots for other uses that benefit the wider community. So for instance, there's a need for some off-street resident parking. We know that parking is a real issue in Jaywick Sands, and if we're going to deliver some of those seafront improvements, we'll need to ensure that residents have places to park. And then there is also the option of selling and leasing single plots, which are essentially undevelopable because they're too small to build homes to good standard in terms of flood resilience, to other homeowners, adjacent homeowners, to use as gardens and off-street parking. So the strategy is to essentially pepper pot new homes within the community, and they can then be used as part of a wider strategy for rehousing people who are living in substandard homes and starting to look at redevelopment options working with those property owners. So it's not about compulsory purchasing anybody's house. It's about saying, well, we're providing options here. We're providing a good, if you like, float of good quality homes within those neighbourhoods that we can then work with the community and with property owners to gradually redevelop and support them to redevelop their plots over time. And essentially it's a sort of pump priming, if you like, whereby you can get therefore a pipeline of phases and waves of gradual but incremental development. So that's sort of summarised in the diagram here, this combination of measures, so including some enforcement, which the Housing Healthy Homes team is already starting to work on, but most importantly, working with property owners, looking at funding options that can incentivise and help owners to actually improve their own properties. For instance, looking at whether low-cost loans or grants can be made available, that as part of a funding package. And if people do want to relocate, and it is only if they do want to relocate out of Jaywick Sands, looking at options for potentially, essentially, a form of swap scheme to homes elsewhere in the district, which would then allow the council to take over homes vacated in Jaywick Sands under that and redevelop them to be further flood resilient homes. So it is very much about that kind of virtuous circle about providing new homes which can be used for rehousing, a combination of incentives, carrots and sticks, if you like, some enforcement, but more on the carrot side to say, well, actually, we can incentivise and help you as a property owner, because most property owners in Jaywick Sands do want to make their properties better. The ones that cause problems are a small minority, if I'm honest. And we heard a lot in consultation from property owners saying, well, you talk about flood resilience, but we don't really know how to do this. If we had more support and help to make our properties better, we'd really like to be able to do that properly. So it's about trying to help people to do the right thing for themselves, as well as providing, if you like, that pattern book of new home designs and a pipeline of new homes as well. The other parts of the strategy are, in a way, more conventional regeneration strategy. So creating more space for business, tourism and local services. There's essentially 3 opportunities for economic development and growth in Jaywick Sands that were identified. Firstly, meeting local needs, because there is a deficit in just basic shops and services and so forth in Jaywick Sands. And we're seeing that now with the Sunspot and the success of letting those shopfront units that are all taken and there's a waiting list for. There is an appetite to set up businesses and provide those services in the community, but not the space to do it. There's a wider demand in the area for SME business units. Tendring as a whole, and particularly the east end of Tendring, has a deficit in SME business units. So there's an opportunity to draw that into Jaywick Sands and growing that tourism and visitor economy. So the strategy involves, firstly, safeguarding existing non-residential uses. So showing actually those existing non-residential uses, business and community uses, shouldn't be redeveloped to residential. They should remain as business space, and making sure that those business owners are then also, a bit like the residential property owners, incentivised and supported to improve that quality of those premises so they become more lettable and more attractive for businesses to locate into. Encouraging the growth of local commercial clusters, i.e. saying there are actually areas where if you wanted to redevelop your property, your existing residential property, for a commercial use, that would actually be appropriate. This is primarily around the seafront areas, because actually there are commercial uses that are compatible with neighbourhoods, which are compatible with residential areas, and we should be encouraging those property owners, if they wish, to look at a range of options. And thirdly, using the sites that you own to develop additional non-residential floor space. So looking at a master planned approach to those sites over time. And there are a number of other discussions which are ongoing with, for instance, health services and the likewise, about whether there's also opportunities to improve some of the wider social infrastructure through that form of development. Public open spaces. I'm not going to go through this in great detail, but there is much more in the report. The headline is that there is a lot of it, but the quality and the facilities it offers have deficits. There is a deficit in terms of formal and informal play, for example, and the spaces also don't perform particularly well for other forms of leisure and recreational activity. So we've put together a costed scheme for all of these 7 open spaces in the community, which works with what we've heard from the local community about what they'd like to see in those spaces and what they'd like to do in the open spaces. And essentially they're like a mini brief for each of those spaces for revitalising and regenerating them so that they're both more functional, but also work better from a biodiversity perspective and a climate change perspective as well. Accessibility and connectivity. So one of the objectives in the local plan, going back to those 5 original objectives, is improving connectivity from Jaywick Sands to other areas. It is at the moment a 1 street in and 1 street out community. There is very little connectivity, and it actually takes quite a long time for people to get from one end of the community to the other. So there are a number of sort of small scale improvements that are proposed as part of the place plan, but the most significant one to draw your attention to is the proposal for a new path across the Tudor Fields, which would in day-to-day use be a walking and potentially cycling path, but also would be able to be used in the event of a flood or an emergency to improve emergency access. Because at the moment, all emergency access has to come down Golf Green Road and Jaywick Lane into the community. And then ends up both very far from Brooklands, which is the area at greatest flood risk, and then from then onwards you are wading or in a boat. So the new route proposed uses the existing banks and connects into Crossways at the top of the bottom of the Tudor estate, and then links in to Lotus Way. From a day-to-day perspective, this would actually shorten the walk to school from Brooklands by about 10 minutes, which is really significant, helping children and parents to actually get to school by foot or by bicycle, rather than waiting for a bus, which can take a very, very long time. And then that important emergency escape, which was highlighted again by the emergency services also in consultation. There was a lot of concern about how inadequate the access is felt to be in emergencies. It's worth stating that that route is not a 100-year flood-safe route. It's a flood-safe route for now and for a few decades to come. And the place plan does highlight that in the longer term, and as part of the wider seafront defences approach, a longer term approach to understanding how to get emergency vehicles in and out of Jaywick Sands will need to be looked at. But in the short to medium term, that would provide a safe route that would be above floodwater until you get to Lotus Way itself, and therefore would allow people to both be evacuated and the emergency services to get in that dreadful sort of event, which sadly we have to plan for. Drainage infrastructure, again, this is extremely technical, so I've kept this one extremely brief because I think it's you can either say a small amount or you have to go into a huge amount of detail on this. But suffice it to say, there are issues which everybody knows with the foul and the surface water drainage in Jaywick Sands, and particularly in an area of flood risk, that is not something you really want. You don't want to have a flood and then have your sewers backing up into your streets. And unfortunately, today there are still issues, even when there is no flood, of sewers that are at capacity. This is technical and complicated and will require significant partnership working, because unfortunately it's not within your gift as a district council, because you do not own those sewers and those drains. However, we've heard a lot from the community, and we've also spoken with Anglian Water about some of the issues in the area. And it's certainly a recommendation that a partnership project is developed to address that and funding sought to achieve that. And lastly, as Gary mentioned at the very beginning, community engagement and stewardship is key here. The local plan makes that very clear in saying that change in Jaywick Sands must come about with the full involvement and support of the community. So the place plan does include some recommendations about how to involve community members in decision making and in the long-term stewardship and governance of the community. That will be a process. Again, you can't suddenly create these structures overnight. You have to work with people to find the best structures that people are happy with and feel will represent them and their communities as well as possible. But we do recommend that at least in the interim, potentially a Jaywick specific statement of community involvement of some sort be developed, because I think that would be a very important signal to the community to say, we do take this seriously, we are committed to working with you, and we will get there in the end. Let's just start that journey and see how we go. So you'll be pleased to know I've come to the end of my presentation. Just a summary of the public consultation. We hope to start in mid-November, subject to all of the approvals through the Cabinet process. We'll hold in-person events again at many venues in Jaywick Sands, as well as online and so forth. And then we'll obviously take that feedback fully on board before revising the place plan and bringing it back to yourselves and to the council for consideration. Very happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Hannah. Yeah, happy to answer any questions, take any comments. Chairman, I refer you to the recommendation on page 18 of the printed agenda, which is for the Planning Policy and Local Plan Committee, notes the content of the draft Jaywick Sands Place Plan and recommends to Cabinet that the above document, which is in Appendix 1, be approved for consultation with the public and other interested parties.
Thank you very much, Hannah, for a very, very clear presentation full of huge amount of information. I just wonder if you can have your work cut out when you go to the public and try to explain all what you have shared with us tonight. So I just wondered if some small bite-sized bullet points, and I'm sure you've got that well in hand. I think it's important that we get as much feedback as possibly can. We won't be living there. Those who live there have been given the opportunity to improve what they have, and the fact that we are being as ambitious as possibly can is really to be applauded. It could be criticised to say that you are going too far, but I think if you don't aim high, you're not going to get far, are you? And that's so the recommendations, Gary, is already, we got A and B to note the contents and B to recommend the Cabinet to approve the document for public consultation. Are there any questions from members? Councillor Fairley.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, really good presentation. Thank you, Hannah. I just wonder, so far, what sort of feedback you have had from residents in relation to things like the design of what's already there and what they want. So that's one question. A further question is, and you did try very well to sort of unwrap the funding thing, but I still have a couple of questions on it. So it's 108 million if done now, 88 if done 2033, and then less if done for 2058. If all is done now, does that mean that you forego the funding in 2033 and 2058? Or does it come anyway? Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. So just on the design question, it's a really great question. And we did a lot of work on this with the design guide that Gary mentioned as well. We've heard a lot from the community that they value the distinctive character of Jaywick Sands. They really like the fact that all the houses are different, that they're very individual and that they have a very unique character. So it's really important that some of the essence of that character is sustained whilst also making the changes that need to be made. You know, we heard very strongly that residents did not want to see Jaywick Sands suddenly just look like anywhere else in Essex or anywhere else in the country. And that's the delicate balance that has to be struck. And so that's why one of the reasons why we are not proposing, for instance, to kind of rip up the street pattern and the kind of overall shape of Jaywick Sands and completely redevelop that, because that really would be starting to destroy that unique character that residents really value. The challenge is that the plots are small in many parts of the community, and when you're taking into account the floor levels required to keep people safe from flooding, those buildings do get taller. And that's why the JWIC SANS design guide, so the SPD that's now in place and adopted, sets out a quite careful set of parameters to say, well, actually, homes which necessarily will need to get a little bit taller must also be designed in a way that doesn't cause neighbourly impacts to their surrounding properties. So, for instance, overlooking and overshadowing on small plots is a real problem. So we hope that we've struck the right balance. It seemed to be well supported at consultation at the last time. We took the design guide to consultation with the place plan at the last consultation and explained a lot of this very carefully to people who came to talk to us. And that does seem to be a well supported approach. So we are fairly confident that we're striking somewhere near the right balance there, and taking those residents' views. And I think it's really important that the message is not, we want you to knock your house down and change everything about it. But the message is, become safer, try and do what you can if you have the resources, and we can help you with that as hopefully you, as a council, that, the message is to help residents who want to improve their homes to make them safer when the homes are genuinely in a condition that shouldn't be lived in and is a danger to human health in the present day. That's a very different situation, and that's where the enforcement of the Healthy Homes team and so forth are looking at. With regard to the funding, you've pretty much got that spot on. So if you could magic up £108 million today, and we could all get to work, that would be that. And then essentially you would have made the community safe so that flood grant and aid in 2033 wouldn't be available to you, because the flood grant and aid is only available if the community is still at risk at that point in time. So if the magic fairy had come along and just made it all safe, there would no longer be any flood risk, and therefore they would say, fine, you don't need any funding. If you took up that flood grant and aid in 2033 and combined it with the 84 million of partnership funding and delivered the scheme then that would be essentially that. And then only when in 75, 100 years time, those defences were starting to, who knows where we'll be with sea level rise, but let's say if sea level rise continued, if those then started to prove inadequate, then a new funding regime would kick in. But of course, we're talking, who knows what the political situation might be, of course, at that point in time. We can't possibly look that far ahead. And then if you decided that the 84 million or the 108 million was, or you couldn't raise that funding, you couldn't get support for that, whether it's from partners or a combination of investment from public and private, you would still need that £20 million for the baseline scheme. So I think that's the difficult bit. That is unfortunately there's no scheme that doesn't involve someone dipping their funding to complement that flood grant and aid, because the level of risk in JWIC SANS and the cost of building those defences, it's simply not, well, the Environment Agency are telling us it's simply not possible to build flood defences that will keep that community safe at that 0.5% risk level without some additional partnership funding. And that's just, them's the rules, they would say. That's just the way the system is set up. And it's not uncommon across the whole country. So, there've been major flood defence improvements in many parts of the country which have taken a similar approach, whereby whether it's the council, developers, county, special funding pots have been brought into play to complement the flood grant and aid to make a scheme happen, bring that forward with the multitude of different benefits that then accrue.
You mentioned. Oh yes, that's of course. Yeah, Councillor Fowler, as the chairman of the planning committee, do you have any comments or any questions to put forward at this stage?
Not at this time, Chairman. Thank you.
That's very good. Thanks so much indeed. That'll be very, very good to go through the responses once we receive them. And there are some pretty hard facts there, and I do applaud you for your honesty into having been involved in the Coast Defence project at Holland, but it took several attempts, many attempts in fact, because the cost ratio benefit they talked about, they only can see not to the wider benefit, but just what's the danger of the to the immediate houses where the location is. Very unfair, but those are the rules. We've got to work with them. So therefore, we well done for having put together an excellent report. And are we all in favour of recommendation A and B? I think that's unanimous. Chairman, thank you very much indeed. Thank you, Hannah. Thank you, Gary. We go to agenda. I think that's something else, is it? I lost my page. That's it, yeah. That's the end. Members, thanks so much indeed for your attendance, good presentation, and we look forward to progressing this with Cabinet. Thank you.